History books are full of weird fashion choices, and when retro fashion has a habit of falling into modern trends, where does one draw the line at dated choices? Well folks, today we've got all kinds of weird footwear, living accessories, paper dresses, and more for your curiosities. Question for you: what do you think is one of the weirdest fashion choices in history? Let me know in the comments, since I consider myself a bit of an expert, and let's get into things. Between the 12th and 15th centuries, shoes with long pointed toes came into and out of fashion. The shoe, which was known as the Crackowes or pike shoe, owes its name to Cracow, the capital of Poland, where the style originated. The shoes were ridiculous. They had to be attached by a chain to the wearer's legs, and the trend is thought to have been started by nobles in 1382 when King Richard II married Anne of Bohemia, who stylized the shoe. Now while both men and women wore them, men's shoes were way more extravagant, and the toes were made much longer than the women's. Some shoes got so long that the wearer had to tie the ends to their calves to avoid tripping. There were actually local laws across Europe setting a maximum allowable length for those crazy shoes. Now men were considered more wealthy if they wore shoes with long toes, and they even wore them into battle at one point. Now by 1465 the shoe was banned entirely in England and France, with royal orders not allowing any cobblers from participating in their construction. Many thought the shoes fashionable, but others considered them tacky even at the time, seeing as men couldn't do regular tasks like walking or kneeling for prayer. I'm on team tacky. The original platform shoe, the Chopines, was initially worn by women in Venice to help them avoid stepping in mud and dirtying their skirts. And however, the shoe soon became a symbol of status. The higher the shoe, not the higher to God, the higher the woman's social class was. These were worn throughout the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries and were made by stitching delicate slippers made of velvet or silk onto blocks of wood or cork. Now in 15th century Spain, most of the country's cork supply went into making the shoes of wealthy noblewomen. Many women practiced walking in their Chopines and could walk reasonably well, towering above their peers, symbolically and literally looking down on them. Now they were regulated in Venice in 1430, the law stating that the platform could not extend beyond 3 inches. This regulation was widely ignored and women continued to wear stilts essentially, sometimes rising to 20 inches high. Yeah, if you were putting these on, you kinda needed 2 servants to put them on, and then a whole team to make sure you're not gonna go or fall while walking. Nowadays, platform shoes tend to be a lot easier to wear and rise to lesser heights. Like when I think about my Demonia boots, which are a popular brand of platform boots, they're only like 4 to 5 inches tall. Much more reasonable and safer to walk in, or to run and skip in if that's your preference. In 1890s America, a fashion fad came about that mixed pet ownership with animal-inspired jewelry. Live lizards were marketed to women as chameleons that would change color with the wearer's outfits, providing a matching jewel, if you will, for every piece of clothing. Women latched onto the idea, putting these small creatures in tiny collars attached to little chains which would hold them to a brooch, a scarf, or even in the hair of the wearer. Now the SPCA stepped in, arguing that these women were cruel to the lizards, wearing them for pure novelty with no idea how to care for their accessories properly. And thank goodness for that. New York even released a citywide ordinance that no more lizards would be sold. People ignored that, but in 1920 the Humane Society intervened when lizards were still being used as hair clips. An anecdote of the time went that a girl wearing a chameleon hairpin to a dance accidentally lost the lizard in her date's mouth when he got too close to her head. Guess we found where Parent Trap got the inspo. So while animal-inspired and filled jewelry wasn't a new concept, it actually has roots in Roman and Mayan civilizations. Oh, and this more modern practice actually died out by like the latter half of the 20th century. They were traded for more benign insects, like butterfly clips. Now, is this practice completely outdated? No, it's still done for fashion photo shoots and music videos, a la Britney Spears and her iconic VMAs performance. But nowadays, animal safety is the first priority, and it's just not as mainstream. Based on archaeological evidence, ancient Egyptians wore wax or perfume cones on their heads, rumored to be perfumed to hide the body odor. According to historical paintings, women were depicted wearing it more than men, and these were usually worn on top of the wigs, and the cones would slowly melt over the course of the day. Now folks wearing the cones are often depicted wearing a long translucent dress, and on some occasions a kilt, with the fold of the dress draped over the left shoulder. In coloration, the dress often resembles the cone itself. The skirt of the dress is white, while the upper portion is an orange or amber color. Distinct lines and squiggles are sometimes painted running through the orange portion and over the person's arms, and the bottom of the orange portion often terminates in a streaky pattern that seems to fade into the white part of the dress. Now both the men and the women wearing the cone almost always wear a headband with ornamentation running around the front and sides of the head, with a string circling around the back. And a similar band can sometimes be seen going around the cone itself. A lotus flower drapes over the front of the headband, or sometimes comes out of the front of the band or out of the cone itself. Now, fun fact, while head cones are often depicted on paintings of the era, they actually weren't found as archaeological evidence until 2009, and this was according to research published in 2019, so kind of new. From 1908 to 1914, a short-lived trend emerged in women's fashion that greatly limited their mobility and freedom. The hobble skirt referred to any skirt skirt with a slight enough hem to effectively hobble a woman by impeding her stride length. When the hobble skirt emerged, women became more physically active, and the skirt was often jokingly called the speed limit skirt. French fashion designer Paul Poiret is credited with the invention of the skirt, famously claiming that his pieces freed the chest and shackled the legs, seeing as his aesthetic steered away from corsetry and towards those slim skirts. Streetcar lines often offered hobble skirt carriages in the 1910s, which allowed women to board the car without stepping up. Now, while they may have been mobile in this way, the hobble skirt caused a lot of deaths, seeing as it didn't allow folks to escape in an emergency. One woman could not dodge a loose horse at a racetrack due to her hobble skirt, and another fell into the Erie Canal after stumbling. So the skirts lost popularity when it seemed inappropriate to promote impractical fashions due to the war, but I've never seen them brought back. Just saying. So macaroni isn't just one of the main ingredients in a delicious bowl of KD, it's also a delightful and strange fashion trend from the mid-1700s. So remember Yankee Doodle Dandy and how he stuck a feather in his cap and called it macaroni? So that lyric is in reference to young Frenchmen in the 1750s who took Italian fashion to the extreme. The most notable element of macaroni fashion was a huge wig with a tiny hat, or a feather on top, but it also included flashy waistcoats, bright stockings, and fancy buckled shoes. According to the New York Times, macaroni men also made up their own language, which was a combination of French, English, and Italian, making their dandy club of fashion even more exclusive and snooty. Alright, paper dresses were a huge, even if short-lived fashion trend in the 1960s, and it was exactly what it sounds like. Made only with a type of paper, these dresses were popularized by brands like the Scott Paper Company and Kleenex as they tried to cash in on the sustainability trend of the time. Now, of course, these dresses were marketed with over-the-top hype and elaborate advertising campaigns, while doing nothing to solve the inherent problem of making clothes with paper. Now sure, they were inexpensive, but they were also disposable. So yes, in theory this did make them appealing to young women looking for trendy and affordable fashion options. It also made them highly impractical. Apart from being prone to tearing at all the inappropriate moments, these dresses were hardly meant for the wear and tear of everyday life, so the trend fizzled out soon enough, though paper dresses were still worn as statement pieces at parties and other social events throughout the 60s. Granted, I wouldn't recommend them for camping expeditions, or anywhere near a candle though, for reasons. Felt hats were all the rage in Europe during the 18th and 19th centuries. Primarily made with hair and rabbit fur, they were a massive improvement over previous hat designs, seeing as they were far sturdier and retained their form for much longer periods of time. Sadly, that was only possible due to an all-new workshop improvement used to stick the fur together, powdered mercury. So as you can expect, prolonged exposure to mercury vapors severely affected the health of hat makers across Europe, resulting in a condition we now know as Mad Hatter's disease. Symptoms included tremors, memory loss, extreme mood swings, psychosis, cardiorespiratory issues, and even early death in a couple of cases. Well, so while the trend didn't strictly affect those wearing the hats, it was a huge occupational hazard for the makers. Demand for the hats remained high, however, especially in Britain, where they only went out of fashion sometime in the 1960s. Still, not good for anybody's health. The ballet boots, inspired by the ballerina point shoes, became popular in the 80s as a contemporary fashion trend. It was a combination of high heels and pointed toes, and the wearer's foot was forced to an almost on-point form. However, a properly tight fit, and I mean firmly laced, would hold the shoe to the wearer's instep and heel, thereby reducing the weight on the wearer's toes. Now, the heel height is usually 7 inches or more, as long as possible, so the wearer's foot, and by that I mean the ankle and toes, are fully pointed or extended in the shoe, because any longer would prohibit standing or would require a platform. And also, a lot of these boots could actually rise to any height on the leg. The knee-high and thigh-high versions did have some zippers to make getting them off and on pretty easy, but still. The thigh-high versions might have actually been designed to stop the leg being bent at the knee, which is only further restricting mobility. Some styles were equipped with supports similar to the toe box and shank of point shoes, but unlike those of the point shoe, the structural design, construction, and integrity provide only limited mobility. This wasn't designed to be broken in like a pair of real point shoes. However, the boots were not intended for prolonged standing, walking, or even dancing. Nowadays, they still do pop up in alternative fashion looks, albeit not often. I know an example of it in recent times might have been the armadillo shoes by late British fashion designer Alexander McQueen, repeatedly worn by Lady Gaga. Unfortunately, if you value your ankles, you just want to stay away from these as much as possible. Look, with the right training, real point shoes are fine. If you're a ballerina, swell. Otherwise, you're gonna do irreversible harm to your ankles. Trust me, speaking from experience. And finally for today, first sported by the Queen of France, Marie Antoinette, the pouf sentimental, or simply pouf, was a large ornamental hairstyle that grew to enormous sizes. Comparable to the wigs worn by men in the same period, these headdresses massively outsized their male counterparts. They were often adorned with ceremonial or sentimental objects that were interwoven or nested upon large wigs made from human hair. Butterflies were often intertwined in the hair, and even crematory urns could be found in these headpieces. Long accepted criticisms of these wigs remarked on their uncleanliness, often claiming that mice or maggots infested them, but just unsanitary. Not it. Alrighty folks, that's it from this corset wearing and alt fashion loving being. I've been Alexa, your resident emo girly. See y'all next time I buzz in over here at Bumblebee.